It's considered the perfect pony car and is the embodiment of the American dream car, the Ford Mustang, a lifestyle statement on wheels.
It's just a lot of fun.
Powered by an 8-cylinder engine, the Mustang stands for unbridled power and freedom. A sports car originally conceived specifically for young people, irrespective of age.
You get goosebumps.
The automotive legend from the 1960s lives on, and demand for perfect Mustangs is huge. In the German town of Pirna in Saxony, true masters of their craft faithfully restore American muscle cars. In the classic car workshop that specializes in iconic American automobiles, the myth that is the Mustang is revived. The company V8-Werk in Pirna near Dresden makes automotive dreams come true. The workshop specializes in pony cars. Pony car is the term used for, by American standards, somewhat smaller but powerful, comparatively affordable sports coupes from the 1960s and 70s. The Mustang was the ultimate car for young Americans back then. Faithful to the original or with modern technology beneath the old metal skin, the experts in Pirna fulfill their customers' every Mustang wish. Christoph Herbrich bought his first Mustang as a student at the age of 24. Now he's the boss and owner of one of the largest Mustang restoration businesses in Europe. Here, the 10 workers restore on average 5 vehicles a year. After working with Mustangs for a decade and a half, the boss knows what a restoration like this involves. A lot of work. And above all, lots of surprises.
Back in
the 70s and 80s, the Mustang wasn't considered a classic that ought to be preserved, but rather an affordable car aimed at young people who probably didn't have that much money. So naturally, they didn't have much money for repairs either. And that's something that follows a car throughout its life.
Poorly executed amateur restorations in the past further increase the work involved in a full restoration. It can take over 1,000 hours to restore a Mustang to its original condition. The base price for a full restoration is nearly 100,000 euros. Depending on condition and interior, it can quickly become twice as much. But despite this, the order books are full and the waiting list long. A Mustang arrives at the V8-Werk shop. Co-worker Alexander Steg has brought a 1968 Shelby GT500 from Bremerhaven. An absolute beauty with a 400 horsepower engine. Shelby stands for the racing driver and Ford tuning legend, Carroll Shelby. To the untrained eye, the car is a pile of junk. To the experts, however, it's a valuable collector's item. Until recently, the GT500 was in Oregon in the United States, waiting to be restored. A father-son project, which was started but never finished.
Some parts have been replaced, like at the front here.
And the rest? Like always, right?
Let's see what we've got inside.
Quite a lot, as it turns out. On the back seat are cardboard boxes full of parts. But there's a gap behind the steering wheel where the dashboard should be. The men discover the interior fittings and trim in the trunk, along with the camshafts. The experts aren't that worried about the mess. What matters to them is that most of what's here is original. So-called barn finds like this are becoming increasingly rare, especially ones that are in a condition still worth restoring.
We've just imported it from the US. What makes this car special is that it's a genuine Raven Black with a black interior and manual gearbox. It's a highly sought-after combination.
Shelbys are absolute cult objects among Mustang fans. Carroll Shelby's workshop transformed standard Mustangs into genuine racing machines. And this is one of them, or will be, once it's been restored.
We'll fix up the gaps, strip her, clean her up, and give her a new rear end.
In other words, remove all the paint and restore the bodywork. The evidence of years of tinkering can be found everywhere, but at least the hobby restorers haven't done too much damage. the men are relieved and satisfied.
We've had car bodies here that were rusted through from floor to ceiling except for the B-pillar, where we've said, okay.
They bought the car as a future project. The market for old bodies has been almost picked clean. So when a car like this is offered for sale, better snap it up. But this also means trusting overseas appraisers, and to a certain extent, your own gut feeling.
The truth is only revealed once the paint has been stripped. We've had cars arrive here that looked pretty decent at first glance, but once the paint is removed, you're like, uh-oh, and they end up taking a few hours more than anticipated. But this one looks pretty good.
To restore a car like this to its original condition takes a lot of experience and painstaking work. The Shelby GT500 is a bit like the holy grail of the Mustang community, a coveted classic with a price tag to match.
Its current value is in the high five-figure range. If you're lucky enough to find one, you can pick one up in the States for around $60,000 to $70,000, depending on equipment and trim level. And you can expect to pay up to €200,000 for a fully restored vehicle.
An investment in the future. The Shelby will be mothballed for the next couple of years, because the company's order book is full to overflowing. Christoph Herbrich caught the Mustang bug in his youth, and the feeling sitting behind a big block V8 is still as special as it was during his college days.
The thrill of driving a Mustang is primarily down to the engines. You get goosebumps.
Ford's concept was well thought out to create a powerful car for its time with a relatively compact body, which was sporty, stylish, and affordable for young people. The developers captured the zeitgeist.
On the one hand, the Mustang was intended from the outset as a car for younger Americans. It's this combination of a relatively compact but very attractive body and powerful V8 engines that gives the Mustang its iconic status.
A characteristic feature of the Mustang and V8 engines in general is their muscular, rumbling sound. Because of the way it's constructed, a big block V8 runs much more smoothly than a 6 or 4-cylinder engine.
The big block is characterized by having loads of torque from low revs, so it's not exactly agile through the curves.
But in the late 1960s, it was a totally sporty vehicle, and still is, even if nowadays many drivers only take them out for Sunday cruises. This car isn't any old Mustang either. It's a dark green 1968 GT390 Fastback, also known as Bullitt. The classic movie of the same name, starring Steve McQueen, made the model world famous. This car comes from the same production line with the same year of construction and was delivered from the factory to dealers with the same equipment as the car in the movie.
It has a Ford Edsel 390 big block engine. In this case, we've increased the displacement slightly to 7 liters. It has a 4-speed manual gearbox, the original Highland green paint job, and a black interior. So it's basically the sister car of the legendary movie vehicle.
The name Fastback describes the characteristic shape of the car's tail. It slopes in an uninterrupted line from the roof to the end of the trunk. In its day, the Mustang featured the most modern design in the Ford fleet, something that appealed to the predominantly young clientele.
It sold like hotcakes. Up until then, Ford had built rather conservative cars, and they wanted to become more youthful, more dynamic, and shed the drab Ford image. And they very much succeeded in this with the Mustang.
The Bullitt doesn't appear outdated though, even after over 50 years. Its design still comes across as muscular and youthful. Sitting in the workshop is a 1967 Shelby GT 500 that has already been fully restored, a unique vehicle. The Mustang has a well-documented and thus verifiable racing history. Vehicles like this are especially sought after on the classic car market.
Zu dem Wagen gibt es
The car comes with a logbook from the Sports Car Club of America, which lists the races the car took part in from 1974 to 78.
74 bis 78 gefahren ist.
Among them, American classics like Laguna Seca, Sears Point, and Sebring. An accident is noted too.
Ja, die
At first glance, it seems to be in pretty good condition, but the races from 74 to 78 have taken a severe toll on the chassis and bodywork. A lot of the frame sections and chassis beams are deformed and have to be replaced.
Deformiert, die müssen ausgetauscht werden.
For the workers, this means they have to basically dismantle the entire vehicle first. They start by removing non-essential items, like the hood and the trunk lid. They'll be stored for the next few months. Then, the car is put on the lifting platform. The mechanics can see for the first time what work awaits them. The racing scars on the underbody are unmistakable. A lot has previously been repaired, but only to one-star restoration standard.
They did their best to patch it up, you could say. They probably made some modifications and just covered it with something. We'll clean it up first so that it looks like this one over here.
Frank Eberhardt dismantles the drive shaft. It looks almost unused, but experience has shown that with classic cars, you never know. A lot of people can fix up a car, but only a few are prepared to pay for a proper restoration.
Max, can you put the pan underneath, please? A smidge of oil will probably come out.
As with every other part of the car, the drive shaft will be examined separately by the team and overhauled if necessary. The good news so far, many parts of the underbody are new or in such good condition that they don't need to be replaced. The same cannot be said about the interior. The coupe still has the original seats, which is naturally a point in favor for this classic car. But it also means that after 5 decades, they have to be reupholstered.
It's normal that they fold down at an angle. The seat back is constructed to allow more space for people getting in the back. It's obviously well used. You can see cracks here. It's also typical for the upholstery to be completely worn out, as in this case. What can you say? It's been around for 30 or 40 years.
The same is true for the back seat. It too is covered with vinyl, as was usual in those days. But most customers choose leather when it comes to reupholstering the seats. The team removes all the interior panels and linings too. Only then does the true condition of the classic become apparent. The entire interior is stored for the time being. Next door, mechanic Andreas Steg drags a roughly 200-kilogram 454 big block into his workshop. The General Motors engine dates from 1970 and has obviously been painted over several times since then.
If I run along here with a screwdriver, the paint just flakes off. All of the loose paint has to be removed for the new enamel to adhere properly. The engine enamel we use is very durable, as it's specifically designed for engines. Don't just use any old paint, we use engine enamel. The enamel still adheres when the engine is running to temperature. It isn't that easy to get off.
The big block isn't for a Mustang though. It's a contract job for a Camaro. Fans of other American makes also rely on the specialists from Pirna and their diligence.
Who knows how often it's been overhauled, or maybe just given a cosmetic paint job. We all know how that is in America. We do a thorough job, clean everything properly, polish all the mating surfaces. We Germans are a bit more meticulous to ensure everything remains leak-proof and doesn't drip oil all the time.
The engine is ready for painting, but other parts are still waiting. This brake drum has been in service for a few decades and is totally rusted. But Alexander Steg can save almost any part with the help of a sandblaster. A stream of fine particles hits the metal at a pressure of 6 bar. Despite what the name sandblaster suggests, a variety of different materials are used in the blasting process. After 30 minutes, the component looks almost new.
We use 0.25 to 1.4 millimeter grit sizes. This is coal slag. Works great. We use glass beads for finer work, like in narrow gaps, and when we want to blast the old paint off GRP panels.
Before a body is ready to be painted, it first has to be put back into shape. This is sometimes like building it from scratch.
It was imported in the condition we see here. We now check everything and decide whether we need to replace anything or if it's okay as is. Then we rework as necessary. Sometimes there are surprises, sometimes not, but there usually are. We've already prepared something at the back. We're in the middle of the job right now. Unfortunately, the rear panel was too badly damaged, so we decided to fit a new one. It's a bit tricky to get in place, so I need help. So let's give it a try and see if we can get it in again. Work safety is in everyone's interest. Right, let's go for it.
Spare parts like this tail panel are newly manufactured. The problem is, the reproduction parts often don't fit as well as the originals. This means the men have to do a lot of reworking. From the radiator grille to the tail lights, every part has to be individually made to fit. It can take weeks before everything is in place. The men have to rework almost every body part.
We check whether the heights are right in conjunction with the tailgate and then solder them together if necessary.
The Mustang being built here will be unlike any that originally left the factory, with exact gap conditions, whether around the hood or the tailgate. The men braze the panels together using an oxyacetylene torch to heat the brazing rod. The liquid solder has to flow into the metal seam by itself. Afterwards, the joint is ground smooth and cleaned. Now, the rear windshield can be test-fitted. Prefabricated elements like this provide the first indication as to whether the work on the body has been done precisely. The goal is for there to be no clearance between the rubber seal and the frame.
It's settling in place. Okay, let's see how it fits together. Pounding on the glass is normal. It makes sure that it's properly seated in the gasket and channel, so that it really fits snugly and is watertight later.
Everything fits perfectly. The men now remove the last safety device, a separation cord between windshield and rubber gasket.
Okay, that's done.
Once the rear windshield has been removed again, the master car body builder gets started eliminating one of the many imperfections on the body framework. He uses various attachments to first grind and then polish the section. He then applies a layer of tinning paste. Tinning is done using a propane flame at a little over 200 degrees Celsius. The tricky part is keeping the temperature constant while evenly distributing the tin. The result is a transition without rough edges. Auto mechatronics specialist Matthias Funkhähnel, nicknamed Funky, is the engine wizard. During testing, the team noticed that the '67 Shelby was losing power. Funky is given the job to find out why.
We'll do a pressure leak test first to check whether everything inside the engine is okay and whether it's losing pressure, and if it is, where the leak is.
To do this, he removes a spark plug. He then screws in an adapter that an air compressor is attached to. A gauge displays precisely what percentage of the air being pumped in is escaping. A little over 20% is still normal. Anything above that is a problem.
This cylinder, number 4 in this case, isn't so good. 37% pressure loss is too much.
But where exactly is the air escaping from? There are 3 possibilities: crankcase, air intake, or exhaust system. Funky gets his tried and tested diagnostic device.
The flame indicates where the air is escaping to, because the air movement there causes the flame to flicker. It's the quickest way of telling at what point compression is being lost. You set a soft flame. This would be the air intake system, no flicker here. Or here. We can check the crankcase here too. And we can clearly see this is where we're losing compression, which means piston rings or cylinder wall. It'll be one of the 2.
A loss of pressure is nothing unusual in engines that are over 50 years old, but it reduces performance, so it has to be fixed.
A week for everything, without building the engine. Together, apart, together, it'll take a week.
Meanwhile, the hotly awaited spare parts for the GT500 King of the Road have arrived. The King of the Road was the top model for 1968 and the most powerful.
It's a 428 motor with 7-litre displacement. It was originally installed in the Police Interceptor. The engines keep going forever. Never stressed, they don't have that much power.
Relatively speaking, that is. In order that customers in some states could insure the car, Ford officially declared the power output to be 335 horsepower. But in reality, it was more like 400 horsepower. Funky applies a sealing compound to the motor block. Then he fits the gasket that connects the block with the intake manifold. The Mustang Big Block is considered to be practically indestructible. Its massive construction not only makes it powerful, but durable too.
The engines keep on running. As long as they have oil and water, they keep running. The carburetor has to be adjusted. Then they just run and don't break down.
For Mustang fans, a Shelby is only a genuine Shelby if it still has the original engine. The workshop's trainee, Max Wünsche, cleans all the mating surfaces meticulously. The company trains its restorers in-house. While the aspiring Mustang expert cleans, Funky applies sealing compound to the top surface of the engine gasket. He carefully places the intake manifold onto the engine block. The bolts are first screwed in finger tight. To secure the intake manifold properly, Funky uses a torque wrench. Then they both insert the hydraulic tappets. They have to sit just right. Otherwise, they would have too much play and the camshaft could get damaged. In the worst case, this could lead to a catastrophic engine failure. The men use a flashlight to check the position of each tappet individually. Then the camshafts are installed. To avoid making any mistakes when tightening the bolts, the mechanics rely on technical literature from the United States.
We first check what the torque setting should be. So torque, we have a 427, 428 engine. Cylinder head, 35 to 45 pounds a foot.
While spare parts for big blocks are difficult to come by, the engine overhaul itself is a routine matter for the experienced team, and the engine could be ready for installation in a few days.
If all the parts are available, it's doable within a week, and that's the sticking point because the parts are in America. Production is slow in America, and getting spare parts is a case of, right, don't have any, might get them again, have to wait and see.
Next door, a special Mustang is being built. The Eleanor is a car that only existed in this form in a movie. Nicolas Cage made the model famous, playing a car thief in the Hollywood production gone in 60 seconds. A so-called restomod, a restored and heavily modified classic car.
It's based on a Shelby GT500 that was modified for the movie. The front is one of a kind. It looks very contemporary, just simply beautiful.
Many of the body panels are produced in Asia, using the decades-old presses from the Ford factories. And they're pretty worn out by now, so the parts exhibit correspondingly high tolerances.
You kind of need to be a magician. You can grind material away, so that takes like a day for both sides per gap. So roughly 1,000 hours until it's finished, and then it's the painter's turn.
So it takes a similar amount of time to build a new Eleanor as it does to restore an old Mustang. The fan base is split. On one side, you've got the advocates of the unadulterated original, and on the other, fans of the highly modified fantasy version, Eleanor.
Whichever way you go, you get a car that is extremely conspicuous. You have to be pretty self-confident because people will approach you every time you stop for gas. People take photos whenever the car stops somewhere. The Eleanor has fans young and old.
Since the restomod isn't a true classic car, customers have a free rein when it comes to choosing the engine. This Eleanor is getting a brand new Ford system. A racing engine with 560 horsepower and 780 Newton-meters of torque. Unlike the engines back then, it has a forged crankshaft, forged connecting rods, and an aluminum cylinder head.
It's been stroked, taking it from 351 to 460 cubic inches. Should make it fun to drive.
The engine will be installed in a few months once the Eleanor is completely built. There's another American classic that V8-Werk specializes in, the Chevrolet Corvette. This second-generation Stingray C2, with its distinctive split rear windshield, has, like all Corvettes, an unusual feature. Its bodywork is made from fiberglass reinforced plastic, or GRP for short. That makes the cars especially light and thus sporty.
GRP sounds great in principle, but it has a disadvantage. It cracks in many places, which makes it incredibly time-consuming to professionally repair a GRP body. Over the vehicle's 50 or 60-year life, a bunch of hairline cracks develop that have to be sanded down and re-laminated so that the paintwork doesn't crack after the car has been fully restored.
You can see what that looks like next door on a 1958 C1, a first-generation Corvette. This one has had several accidents and had numerous cracks. It took months to restore, a job for absolute experts.
Very few people still do this kind of work. It's a dying trade. It's highly specialized work.
Every crack has to first be cemented with repair resin and then brought back into shape. Then carefully sanded down before heading to the paint shop. Meanwhile, Funky is busy with a 50-year-old Mustang gearbox. At first glance, all of the gears appear to be okay, but the finest hairline cracks and traces of wear can be difficult to see. A thorough clean is needed. Time has left its mark on the material, and a lot of dirt.
This is a disassembled Mustang gearbox. We clean the parts as it's easier to examine them properly then. The dirt can hide signs of wear or abrasion. You can see them better when everything's clean.
He cleans each gear individually with cleaning solvent. The result? Incredibly, all the parts have survived the ravages of time pretty much unscathed. This transmission can be refitted without having to be overhauled. Just 30 kilometers away in Geising is an enormous spare parts warehouse. The company Velocity has specialized in parts and accessories for American cars, and Mustangs in particular. The 1,000 square meter warehouse has everything the classic car owner needs or desires. From entire engines to Mustang baseball caps, around 8,000 different items are stored here.
We get everything directly from the United States. We have another warehouse there. A lot of things are made in China, so the parts may have traveled around the world before they end up here. They ordered an ignition coil, a set of brake shoes, and a gasket and filter for the oil pan.
Between 100 and 120 packages leave the warehouse per day on average, and the number is increasing. Hardly any other cult car was built in such large numbers as the Mustang, and hardly any other car has as many fans. The mail order company supplies customers throughout Europe.
We have a lot of customers in Austria, Switzerland, and Germany, and we supply customers in Greece, Italy, and France as well. But I'd say the majority of our customers are in Germany, so presumably that's where most of the Mustang drivers are too.
And the market continues to expand. Owners of the modern model ranges, built since 2004, also get their spare parts here. The iconic Mustang lives on, now in its 6th generation, and there's no end in sight. At V8 Werk, master mechanic Oliver Floss, nicknamed Ollie, has tuned the Bullitt a little. The extra power for the sister car of the legendary movie car also needs taming. To this end, a 10-inch drum brake system is fitted to the rear axle instead of the originally installed 9-inch model. This type of brake is very rarely used on cars today.
This here is the brake cylinder. When you step on the brake pedal, the brake shoes are squeezed apart and press against the brake drum, which creates a braking effect. There's a bigger version, but that's for the GT500 with the even bigger engine. But it's totally adequate.
The car is fitted with new brakes at the front too. The front wheels are equipped with disc brakes, as they were from the factory. But in this case, brand new ones from a quality manufacturer are fitted. Ollie starts by bolting on the brake caliper. Then he sprays the back of the brake pads with copper paste. The paste prevents the brakes from squeaking later. He adjusts the brake pads with a clip, then attaches the brake hose and screws it tight. Mustang restoration often involves finding a happy medium between authenticity and modern technology. On the one hand, the customer wants a modern braking system, and for the look, larger wheels, but in an historical design, a balancing act for the mechanics.
Man muss es abwägen können.
You have to be able to find the right balance. We're not fitting newfangled wheels like the ones used by Brabus, Mercedes, BMW, etc. We're using wheel designs that were around back then, just bigger.
The team tries to satisfy all customer wishes, even if the originality suffers, and it isn't always possible to get a historic, old-timer license plate as a result.
It's a genuine Bullitt. I mean, according to the Finn, it really is a Highland green like the Bullitt. It's the same vintage, that is 1968. But we're adding the chrome strips and all the trim so that it looks like an original car from back then, and not like the one in the movie. Other than that, it has the same equipment, the same engine with the same 4-speed manual gearbox like the movie car.
In the end, only experts will be able to tell this Bullitt apart from its famous Hollywood twin due to its wheels and front end. While the big screen Bullitt became famous as a result of one of the wildest car chases in movie history, this one is more likely to be used for relaxed day trips, if it passes final inspection by the boss.
We're finished with the restoration, and now it's time for a final test and tune drive.
Following its restoration, the car can do more than when it left the factory in 1968.
We've done some work on the engine. We've increased the displacement from 6.4 to 7.1 litres. And according to the engine dynamometer, it now outputs 450 horsepower.
The test drive reveals a few imperfections. For instance, the 4-speed gearbox sticks a little.
We make a note of everything, and then we work through everything before doing a full final test drive to make sure that all the issues have been rectified. The goal is to hand over the car with 250 to 500 kilometers on it.
For a price of a little over 100,000 euros, the Bullitt is then handed over to its new owner. In return, he gets a cult car from 1968 in pretty much mint condition. And with technical upgrades that make driving it much more relaxed and safer as part of the bargain. Many Mustang drivers, however, are sticklers for authenticity. This 1967 GT 390 Fastback is being restored from the ground up for one such customer. Everything on this car, down to the last screw, should match the original. The customer comes from Switzerland, and the authorities there are very particular when it comes to the old-timer plate for historic vehicles. Even the electrical system must be restored to its original state, including using the fuses typical of the time.
There are only glass tube fuses installed, just 6 or 7 for the entire vehicle, which isn't exactly state-of-the-art these days. But that's what the Swiss authorities demand. Nowadays, we use blade-type fuses. First off, there are a lot more fuses here than in the original wiring harness, and a lot more is protected.
Such faithful restorations are a special challenge for the experts. The aim is to build a Mustang literally by the book.
Because we have to build the car as faithfully to the original as possible, we consult technical documentation. We can't know how everything was originally built back then.
These days, the original auto repair manuals are almost as rare as the cars themselves. Technical documentation can easily cost $200 and more on the second-hand market. Olli installs the wiring harness exactly according to the book, precisely the way it was done back then at the Ford factory, which means along the bodywork rather than discreetly beneath the lining, as has become standard practice at V8-Werk. This Dream in Pink is also an original, Playmate Pink to be precise. A special edition from 1967, created for the woman back then.
It was also an eBay purchase and in a really terrible condition. The body was in 2 parts. It didn't have an engine or gearbox or any other ancillaries. There really were only 2 parts of the car, 2 essential parts.
The team was only able to determine that it was an original Playmate edition based on the vehicle identification number. This special edition is especially rare. It isn't even known how many were built. That makes a genuine Playmate edition all the more valuable.
The car has been on the road for over a year now, and we just want to get an updated valuation for the insurance company. So we've asked an appraiser to come in and assess the vehicle again.
In the meantime, the car has been upgraded further.
We've replaced the original imitation leather upholstery on the front and rear seats with real leather. And the trim panels in the back of the car have been covered with real leather while matching the original stitching, etc., so that everything still looks authentic.
Vehicle appraiser Maria Münch documents every detail of the car by camera. The value she determines relates explicitly to the car's condition at this moment in time. Even the most minor damage could quickly reduce the value again. She starts by checking the technical condition of the vehicle. At least the electrically operated roof works perfectly.
We have various checklists that we work through. Is it technically okay? Does everything work? Does the transmission work? The engine run smoothly? Paintwork, visual aspects, is there any flashing, polishing marks or inclusions in the paintwork? Dirt, chrome work is also important. And of course, the quality of the interior workmanship, whether all the seams have been sewn neatly. In this case, specifically the rear leather seats and reproduction parts.
This car was especially painstakingly restored. As such, the valuation is correspondingly high. But as is so often the case, it's still below the sum actually invested in the car. This probably doesn't bother the owner much. Car enthusiasts often see the objects of their passion through rose-tinted glasses.
The paintwork is immaculate. The color is Playmate Pink, faithful to the original, a matter of taste.
For this so-called matter of taste, she determines an insurance value of 120,000 euros. Extras, like the new leather upholstery, have further increased the value. V8 Werk recovers seats in its own upholstery shop, a luxury not many restorers can afford. The upholstery shop is the domain of unbridled. The trained seamstress makes the seat covers and trim for all Mustangs and Corvettes that are to receive a new interior. Each of her creations is a one-off, in contrast to the original Ford seat covers. They were mass-produced from vinyl, but nearly every V8 Werk customer wants leather for their new interior.
Vinyl doesn't really last that long, as the surface slowly deteriorates. Then you get tears and cracks, whereas leather gradually wears away. You end up with an attractive patina that you don't get with vinyl.
Customers can choose from 300 colors and 30 different types of leather. When it comes to leather for car seats, durability is one of the main considerations. Soft leather is unsuitable as it wears out too quickly. Another aspect is safety. The leather upholstery has to provide proper support for the driver.
This is an automotive leather. I can get it as half or whole hide, depending on what I order. In contrast with vinyl, that's sold by the running meter. I can't use all parts of a hide. Because it's a natural product, there's sometimes a scar or a hole in it. Maybe the skinner wasn't careful, or the cow was unfortunate and got caught in a barbed wire fence.
Unbridled spends up to 3 days working on a seat. An entire interior can take up to a month and a half. Thomas Hauswald goes for a test drive in the Pink Special Edition, the creation that reflected the image the Ford marketing department of the 1960s had of women. That's of little interest to the car bodybuilder. The sun is shining, the roof is down, and the chemistry between him and the Playmate Edition is perfect.
Sie kann so sanft sein.
She can be so sweet, and yet so demanding. She's a lot of fun.
Nur Spaß macht.
Through the Harz foothills with the top down, a flavor of the Midwest in East Germany, with typical German weather.
And it's starting to rain.
He closes the roof just in time. A downpour wouldn't do the new leather any good. Time for a first review.
Der Motor.
The engine, as it's installed here with the 5-speed gearbox, feels better revving a bit higher. It only starts running smoothly above around 2,000 RPM. Otherwise, it kind of chugs along like now. But when you get above 2,000, it's all good.
Läuft das eigentlich?
Besides the shower, the test drive is uneventful. The Playmate Edition drives perfectly. The reward for painstaking work, including the work by Thomas Hauswald. When he got the car 2 years ago, it was a complete rust bucket. He's put 300 work hours into the body shell alone, but he thinks it was worth it.
It's definitely ready for delivery. Cleaned it up nicely and make it ready for presentation.
The convertible received its paint job in the original Playmate Pink in Saxony, but with a bit more gloss. Every coat of paint had to be reapplied. The company contracts this work out to Thomas Bauer's paint shop, like with this 1969 Mustang. The boss used to work for Daimler before setting up on his own. Their main business is repairing accident damage, scratches, scrapes, and the like. But the company's real passion is classic cars.
The biggest difference to the normal accident repair and paint work is the time factor. When you do it right, a lot more love, time and care go into a classic car restoration. It's just the way it is. Otherwise, the outcome isn't always perfect.
In contrast to a half a century ago, the perfect paint color is done by computer. Every manufacturer has its own color palette with dozens of hues for every model. With this system, the painters can also mix every historical color.
We put the weight into the computer. It spits out how many grams we need to make the paint color for the vehicle we're working on. With a mixing machine like this, we can create 100,000 different tones these days.
Before the Mustang is painted, a worker first cleans it thoroughly. He removes the finest of dust particles with an air blowgun and anti-static cloth. Dust inclusions would ruin the perfect finish. The painter applies another coat of primer. Then the first blue base coat. He repeats this step. The third application of blue paint is misted on at lower pressure and from a greater distance. The painter uses a special light to check whether the paint is evenly distributed and no runs have formed. The Mustang then spends 20 minutes in the oven at 65 degrees Celsius until the paint takes on a matte appearance and is dry enough for the clear coat. In front of the paint booth, a trainee prepares another Mustang for painting. The finishing touches. He applies another wafer-thin layer of filler, then sands it down and polishes it. Here, less is more.
We try and use as little filler as possible, especially with classic cars, because they're generally driven for much longer and kept for much longer, and much more money goes into renovating them. So, as a rule, the less filler used, the longer the lifetime of the paint job. And when it comes to the paint layers, they shouldn't be too thick.
The blue Mustang returns to the paint booth. First, a final coat of paint is applied, then the clear coat. This is what gives the car its glossy finish. The painter again applies 2 layers, allowing each to dry afterwards. After drying, the paint is cured for half an hour at 65 degrees Celsius. The result is a dream car in royal blue, inspired by the original color Acapulco blue. Now, the Mustang will spend the next few weeks drying out thoroughly, time that the master painter grants the classic cars. A classic car enthusiast through and through.
Classic car restoration from the ground up, faithful to the original, historical, all screws the same. When a car is restored in Germany, especially a Ford Mustang, the quality afterwards is better than when it originally left the factory. That's a fact.
Back in the workshop, the team pushes the Bullitt to the final station before being delivered to the customer. The V8 motor is fine-tuned. The engine is run for up to a half an hour in a sealed booth. The exhaust gases are extracted via 2 hoses.
We're now testing it and precisely adjusting the ignition timing and carburetor. You focus on cylinder number 1. That's the reference cylinder, as it were. You set that, and all the others follow suit. Assuming you have the right firing order, that is.
The workers adjust the carburetor so that the engine runs a little richer. That is, so it receives more fuel. This increases the engine's durability. To adjust the ignition timing, Olli connects a diagnostic device to the distributor cap. The firing order specifies the sequence in which the cylinders fire. In the case of the Ford V8, the 7th and 8th cylinders fire last, unlike most big blocks. With the help of a stroboscope, Olli checks whether firing is occurring at the right time. The Bullitt is now finished and ready to be delivered to the customer. And the next classic cars are already waiting. This barn is where V8-Werk stores its finds from around the world. Here are the remnants of the American dream, Mustangs and Corvettes from the 50s and 60s. Some of the cars are in pitiful condition. In many cases, it's not yet possible to say when they will be restored. For the time being, these projects are nothing more than dreams waiting to come true. Even after over half a century, the Mustang has lost none of its allure. Then as now, it stands for youthfulness and raw power. An end of the legend is not in sight. In Germany and elsewhere, hundreds of classic Mustangs are restored each year. But there's one thing a true Mustang never ought to be: perfect. Just very close to it.